Big needles for breakfast, dinner and tea, because that's the way this life goes. Hello, my name is Ingrid Wagner and these are Big Knit circular needles and this is Big Knit yarn. What we're going to do today, this morning or this afternoon or this evening, whichever time of day you may have caught me, we're going to find out how to use circular needles and particularly how to make using the circular needles to make a sleeping bag, and then using circular needles to make a knitted poof. And this means that you will learn how to increase with the circular needles as well. If, like me, when you were told about circular needles, you couldn't get your head around it at all, because words don't work for everybody, do they? Then you'll need to watch this and need to try it out, really, because it's great fun. And in fact, you can do one row knit, one row purl like you do ordinarily, but you can also knit round and round and round. And when you do that, your knitting comes out like stocking stitch, but you're only doing the plain knit stitch. I think it's magic, but I think it has something a bit more to do with physics. So stay with me and let's find out how to use circular needles. Right, so we're going to set out with these circular needles and the ball of yarn. So slip stitch, and if you've never tried knitting with circular needles before, just treat them like a pair of ordinary needles, so a pair of backwards and forwards needles really. So they'll work in exactly the same way, and I'm using a needle method to cast on because this method gives you a stronger edge. So we're casting on 54 stitches onto here, which is a lot in big knitting terms, and you just let the stitches slide around the needle. They will slide off the wooden bit and just make their way around the needle. So instead of stopping at the end, which the stitches would naturally do on a straight needle, got nowhere to stop really, so they just carry on building up to the, you see, to the other side, and they'll just keep pushing around. So, and keep it fairly loose. If you are a loose woman to begin with on big knitting, you will be fine. If you're a bit tight, well, you know what you've got to do, don't you? You've got to loosen up a little bit. Okay, so 54 stitches we're aiming for. Now we've done the sleepover sack, which we're looking at here with the circular needles, for I think it's ages 5 to 6 and 7 to 11-year-olds. So you can do this in whatever colour you want to, and you might find that you suddenly decide halfway through that you want to change to a different colour. So you can do that if you want to, and I'll show you how to do it. It's very difficult, by the way. Cut the yarn and tie a knot. That's all you do. Tie in the new colour and carry on. Don't have to sew anything in. Can you see how the stitches are just making their way around the needle? So stitches are on their way and we are on our way as well. Okay, and I'll count how many there are in a moment. So we do the sleepover sack for 5 to 6 year olds, and then we do it for 7 to 11-year-olds. But actually the other day I saw an 11-year-old who was nearly 6 foot, and I'm not exaggerating. No, he was very tall. So, you know, I've obviously done it for an average height, but you can knit the height for whatever size person you are knitting for. And actually, if you find that the person is taller than the allotted amount of yarn, then you just add another ball in, really. So, by the way, you'll find on the, can you see where this, sometimes called the stringy bit, by my customers, don't worry about that. It's the warp from the selvage edge, and it's from the weaving itself. So don't worry, just knit it in as a stitch. In terms of big knitting, look, it's only one stitch, so it actually gives you a different texture. So it's actually quite nice. Sometimes the warps are different colours, and this one is a yellow warp, I think. And there you go, that shows where the particular piece of knitting has stopped. Sorry, the particular piece of weaving has stopped, and the loom is moved on, it's turned on. Big factory loom, so it's turned on, and then the weaving starts again. Right, you can see the stitches moving around the needle. So on a straight needle, they'd just be moving straight down. On a round needle, they move around. And this is actually quite nice because the knitting, the sleeping bag, is wide enough to give you room to wriggle around in it. And when we first made this, we did a focus group in a school to see what the kids thought about the sleepover sack. It's for internal use only, by the way. Obviously, you know, you can't use it. It'd be great to use it to go camping, wouldn't it? But wool, just lovely and warm, but it takes a long time to dry, and you must get it dry properly, because otherwise, if wool doesn't dry properly, it starts to get mildewed. Okay, so we now have 54 stitches on the needle, and you can see it just goes all the way around. So on the second row, you just treat it like an ordinary backwards and forwards needle on the straight needle. So one row plain and one row purl. So you just do that. Don't worry about joining anything up, because we will join it up after we've done the first 2 rows. So it's the first 2 rows are always in stocking stitch, which for those of you in the know is 1 row plain and 1 row purl. Can you hear my bracelets jiggling about? I can hear them jiggling about. But you know, so many men in particular have said to me that they could hear the click of their wives, partners, girlfriends' metal needles. Well, you can see the ends of these are just a nice wood, so they're fairly quiet. So they're a really nice wood to work with. They won't, if you are a female knitting, they won't cause your husband to want to kill you. So you may be relieved or not about that. And there we go. So sometimes the stitches move round by themselves, sometimes they don't. So when they don't, you just push them around. So you can see, look, there's 54 stitches on here, but because the weight is distributed evenly with the circular needles, then it doesn't make any difference. So I think the needles measure about 1.20 m or something from tip to tip of the handle to tip of the handle, really. So if you're making anything like a rug, or you're making a sofa throw, and you like knitting on circular needles, you can do it on these needles. You don't have to do it on the straight needles. So you can actually use these. And then after we've done 1 row knit and 1 row purl, we're halfway through now, the first row, then I'll show you how you join everything up. Now you might suddenly find, ooh, that's a really nice yarn, isn't it? Not that you might suddenly find it's a really nice yarn. You might suddenly find you want to change colour. So here are some little balls of yarn that we have just for that purpose. So what do you do when you want to change colour? Here we go. You use a pair of scissors, surprise to cut, and then you tie in another colour. I don't want that one. That one, that's nicer. So decide which colour you want to put in. Tie a knot, give it a good old pull so you know it's not going to come undone, and then just cut it close to where the knot is, and then carry on. Told you it was difficult. And you can do a whole row in a different colour, or you can do half a row in a different colour, or you can do 2 stitches in a different colour. It doesn't matter. It just, you change it whenever you want to. You can do a whole sleeping bag in tartan, the same colour red tartan, or you can do it in 10 different colours if you want to. And it actually doesn't really matter, it's just fun. Certainly it's just fun where the sleepover sack's concerned, because, you know, it's a fun sleepover sack to use. There we go. Can you see where they've bunched up a little bit? So just, there we go, just push them around. There you go. And unlike little knitting, you see, big knitting, you can, you know, you're in charge with big knitting. You can tell it what to do. So we're just finishing off knitting that row on circular needles. So we've knit to the end of the row, and then just like ordinary needles, making sure your knitting is all turned to the front, turn the needles around and continue with a purl row. And remember, the needle doesn't go in that way, it goes in that way. So we're going to do 1 row purl on here, and just like the knit row, you just keep pushing the stitches around. Okay, so you're working with the big knit yarn here. Don't worry about things like tension. You don't have to worry about that. And knitting my bracelet into it. The nice thing about this yarn, of course, it's got the colour and the pattern already woven into it. So when you're knitting your sleeping bag, as we're starting to do here, then you've already got the colour there. And if you want to put another colour in, just keep pushing the stitches round, and there we go. You'll notice they'll run off the end of the needle onto the circular bit. It's like making a big sock, really. and it is just so much fun to do because you get your results very, very quickly. Okay. And you know, sometimes I've heard people say to me, oh, that must be very difficult, or you couldn't watch television while you were doing that. But actually, once you get used to it, then you can, because the nice thing about the big yarn is that you can feel the stitches. So just make sure you keep pushing the stitches around, and it will just sit in your lap, and you don't have to worry about the straight needles holding the stitches at all. It's lovely yarn to knit with because it's all wool. And you know, some people say they'd like to maybe cut up their own fabric to make things, which you can do, of course, but because, particularly with the sleeping bag, or the sleepover sack as we call it, particularly with this one, it's important that it's warm, of course, and it's 100% wool. So it is just so lovely to sleep in. And if you were to cut up fabric yourself, then I think it would be quite difficult to find wool fabric to cut up, because this is all 100% wool, woven wool that we're using, and it's all new. It hasn't been cut up, but it's just a waste product from the mills. And for ages 5 to 7 year olds and 9 to 11 year olds, sorry, I was just checking there what ages, 5 to 7 year olds, it's that kind of height, 4 kilos of yarn you need, and for 9 to 11 year olds it's 5 kilos of yarn. So you can imagine, if you were cutting up, you'd have to do an awful lot of cutting up. A, find the wool fabric to start with, and then B, do all that blooming cutting up, your poor hands. And look at this, this has got the pattern already woven into it and the colour, and it's just lovely. And whenever you want to stop and cut it and change to another colour, you can do that. There isn't any increase needed on these circular needles, because it is simply because it's simply completely forgotten what I was saying there. Because I was looking at the colour on here. Well, fill it in for yourselves. Absolutely fine. Okay, so you've come to 1 row knit and 1 row purl. So just turn the needles around again. All right, and you're going to knit this row. All right, so we're going to knit this row, and so that you don't have to sit through a whole lot of knitting here. We're just going to jump to the end of this row when you've knit the whole row, and I will show you how we're going to join up the stitches. Okay. Right guys, I'm just coming to the end of the knit row here, and when we come to the end of this row, and this is where we join up. Now you can see already that you're pushing the needles round, and that the only way you know you are coming to the end of the row is because you've got a natural gap. Now, a bit like, imagine you're on the Underground in London. You get onto the train and it says mind the gap. So that's exactly what you've got to do here. So this time you're not going to turn the needles around like you would to start another row with straight needles, but you're going to carry on knitting the last stitch of the last row. Okay, so you are joining the gap, you're putting the two together. So you carry on knitting, and if you find you can't get the needle in, just push the stitch. Okay, So you carry on knitting plain stitch. Okay, now if you want to, it's a good idea to mark. You can see where, when you come to the end of a row, where that is. Okay, if you want to put a little coloured marker in, you can, but you'll be able to see where the end of the row came. And when you sew it up, you just sew that little bit up there. Okay, so you just knit round. And the good news for you is that you just keep knitting round and round, and you just keep knitting round and round, because that's all you're doing. So when you see the words knit in the round, that's exactly what it means, because these needles are now round and there is really no beginning and end to a row. So you just keep knitting. And actually, that's the secret of working with big circular needles. So there you go. All right. Isn't it brilliant? It's lovely. So you can put in whatever colours you want to. So let's have a look at how that looks when it's a bit bigger. Well, I hope you've enjoyed learning how to make your knitted sleeping bag and how to make the knitted poof using the circular needles. You can use the circular needles, of course, for anything else you want to do, but in particular, if you do want to knit yourself a sleepover sack or enjoy knitting it with your kids, or you're a small person yourself and you just want to make one for yourself, and that's perfectly okay, you can do that. Just knit yourself into it. It keeps you brilliantly warm because, of course, it's all wool. And if you want to purchase any of the wool and the needles themselves, all the details are given at the end of the programme. So this is Ingrid Wagner and Circular Needles saying goodbye and happy big knitting. For breakfast, dinner, lunch and tea. How about dessert? That's free to finish. Sweet as sweet can be. Big knitting. I could eat spoonfuls of it every time.